Yeah, we had a lot of fun at the Next.js conf. That was awesome. I'm very grateful to have been invited to that, and don't know if many of you saw, but they used the Payload logo on the community slide, which we're really punching above our weight. We're only a year old and getting some attention, which is very exciting. But as most of you probably know very well, I went up on stage and I talked about some big things for the future of Payload. And I thought I'd give a second and just open up to the community and see if anybody wants to chime in with thoughts or questions. I've got a whole agenda prepared that I'll go through. I'll share my screen in a second, but the goal will be just to beat this idea up. This is not set in stone. We want to make sure that we address any concerns, that we run a proof of concept, that we evaluate the strengths and weaknesses, and just make sure that we can do everything possible to make this a good idea. And if it's not a good idea, then don't do it. But personally, I feel like there's a lot of potential benefits here, and we'll talk through some of that today. But let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. I will do that. Oh, question. All right. Yeah, all right. I'm going to address this question from Zephyri first. Hopefully I said that right. Insight about the future of plugin nested docs. Honestly, that's a pretty widely used plugin. And maybe that even needs to become like central to Payload core instead of being a plugin. But I think we're definitely going to continue to support that plugin, but we'll see. Maybe it'll be dragged into core as well. I think the monorepo approach that we moved to for 2.0 is really going to help us drive quality for our officially supported plugins. And we also have some news coming out shortly about authentication related plugins and things like that. I think everybody will like, but we'll address your concerns for sure in the future with the home products route and the path name. You know what? I think your question in specific, we have a pattern for already that maybe Jake or Jared could talk to after this call. Yeah, Paul, I like your idea of what you said about Passport versus like, let's just make it a little easier to extend. I'm going to touch on that in today's call as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to figure out how to share my screen quickly. Let's see. All right. Okay. Do we have it? Okay, so yeah, my talk at the NextConf was all about moving away from Express to Next.js, what that implies, why we might want to do that. And today we're going to go over just a quick recap from my brain about why I think this might be a good move. We'll talk about when, we'll talk about what that means to Payload core, we'll talk about what that means to you, we'll talk about how our API would change and how it wouldn't change, what the negatives are, and then how we're going to approach the problem. So first, I think the biggest complaint, and many of you probably share this with me, is Webpack aliases are aggressively unfortunate. It's a pattern that came out of necessity, but it's a pain in the ass, frankly. Like, I don't like dealing with it. I know none of you like dealing with it. When you build plugins, especially ones that have server-side logic, it's just a lot of like garbage to have to deal with. And really at its core, the struggle there is that the payload config is shared on the server and the browser. And so we need to figure out a logical boundary to separate server-side code from client-side code. And we've thought about this in a lot of different ways. For example, maybe having two separate configs. So you have your server config and your front-end config. And the problem with that is that the developer experience suffers significantly if we enforce you to have two separate configs. The whole graceful aspect of Payload's central config just goes right away. And I hate that. I don't want to do two separate configs ever. I think that would be a mistake. We've also thought of building out like a custom, like a SWC compiler step so that our config is pre-compiled into a server-side config and a browser-side config by traversing an abstract syntax tree. Abstract syntax tree. That is always a mouthful. But that's not fun either. Not only is that really complex, but it's another step in the dev server, like the initialization. It would slow down a little bit. It could be fast, but we have to traverse every single dependency that your config requires, and that's not going to be fun. So that's not ideal. We could also just like add some type of system where we use like those use server, use client directives to dynamically omit certain aspects of the configs. But with all of these things, that's more work that Payload needs to do, and that takes away from the value that we provide. My team and I, we want to focus on becoming the most powerful backend app framework and admin UI that we can. And bundling and worrying about the JavaScript ecosystem is just not really like driving that goal forward. And I'm frankly tired of thinking about bundlers entirely. You probably already know, but we just added Vite support, and that has been a giant pain in my ass. I will tell you that for sure. I don't think Vite is the end-all be-all. I think it's very complex, and it's just it's reinventing the wheel. Now we have Webpack, we have Vite. TurboPack's going to come out and probably make both of those things out of date. And it's just the gauntlet that always changes, that always gets harder and harder. Not to mention ESM versus CommonJS. Like, we're going to need to move to ESM at some point. That's going to happen. And that will come with breaking changes. And then we have to worry about the bundler impact of all of that, which it's just a never-ending kind of loop of doom. And I just want Payload to, if you use Payload, I want you to not even have to think about bundlers at all. If you could remove that from your head when you work with Payload, I think your life would get easier. I do think, yeah, in the chat right now, Vite's liked by devs who don't actually have to integrate it. Yeah, totally. Like, honestly, in principle, it's cool. And if you're doing like a create React app, great, use Vite. But if you're doing anything significant, especially isomorphic, Vite has all of the same problems that Webpack does. It might be a little bit faster, but even that, the speed improvements are negligible. But yeah, in my perfect world, we would have a clear separation between the server and the client. Yes, this talk will be available on YouTube. If we could clearly separate the server and client boundary, then Payload will get more logical to work with. It'll get more stable as a result. I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say 90% of the issues that we see are Webpack related. Like, oh, my admin panel won't load, I'm loading FS or I'm loading Stripe, and everything blew up. That's like by far the most complex and most common issue that people building on Payload run into. But if we could clearly separate that, we would win big time. And that's what server components are for. If I could basically recap the last year of my life working on server components, I would say, I thought at first, I'm like, wait a second. We're trying to reduce the amount of JavaScript that gets sent to the browser. And, you know, maybe we can reduce that by 200 kilobytes. But like, why? This is so complex, and there's so much work involved in like readdressing the mental model of React to get to server and client components and all this stuff. Why do we need this? Like, am I really trying to save 200 kilobytes? I'm going to serve a 10 megabyte video to my visitors, or at the very least, like 6 images that total 700 kilobytes. And I'm here worrying about 200 KBs of JavaScript. What are we doing? But I've realized over the last 6 months that server components don't exist for that. They do. That's a nice side effect. But in reality, the big win there is that you can clearly separate the boundary between the two. And it's declarative, it's logical. You can perceive where the server stops and the client starts. And that's a huge, huge win. That's why server components are being built by React itself. This is not a Next.js paradigm. Yes, Next.js got there first, but I think it's huge. But underpinning all of this, I want Payload's development to be as effective and as efficient as possible. I want to be able to deliver features that are robust. I want to be able to add stability wherever possible. And I think if we could offload a lot of these concerns to existing patterns, it would be a big win for us. So when would this happen? Let's say we were to move to Next.js. It's not going to happen immediately. My biggest fear is breaking changes, making you all run through the gauntlet of, oh, Payload just released a major version. Now we have to switch out all of our infrastructure and move over to Payload. Otherwise, we're not going to get updates. That's a pain in the ass for everyone, including me. And I don't like the thought of adding work to your plates to keep up with our changes. So this is not going to happen immediately. Right now, the name of our game is stability. We want to get lexical and Postgres out of beta and stable as soon as humanly possible. We want to address as much of the concerns of the open issues and everything that we have right now. We've been moving pretty quick on closing issues. I think Elliot's over there working on a release right now. You can't see him on my camera, but he is right there. So is Dan right over there. But right now, our main concern is 2.0 stability. This is not going to happen immediately. Before we do any of this, lexical and Postgres will be stable and official and done and ready to go. So that's number one. I envision this to be like a proof of concept exploration that happens in parallel. It'll probably be me doing a lot of this work, writing the code for the proof of concept. But if anyone's ever heard of the term skunkworks, I love that idea. It's used in like big enterprises to try to like remove red tape and move quickly. But like it came from NASA and like back in the 60s where they were trying to prototype a new jet or something like that. And they had like 10 people locked in a room working quickly towards one goal that was not connected to any of the red tape of the rest of the bureaucracy. And that's how I envision this little proof of concept exploration to go. It would go in parallel. So there may be a couple of us with the community involved would explore the idea of this, how it would look, how it would end up. And it would happen in parallel to Postgres stability, to lexical stability, to content and additional guides, additional documentation, additional examples. All the stuff that we're already going to do would continue exactly as it is. But then there would be a small segment working towards this exploration in parallel. So I think that's the way to do it. But it wouldn't happen immediately. I'm going to talk about impact. I'm going to talk about it both related to Payload and then related to you as you build on Payload. I'm not getting a lot of questions. I've gotten a couple comments here, but if you guys have questions about what I'm saying, just throw them out there and I'll stop. I can multitask. My doctor told me that I do not have ADD, so I can focus. Yeah, makes sense. Good, George. Hey, George, you are great. You're a killer. You have only been in our community for what, a month? You're already making big PRs? Bring it on. Let's do it, man. I don't know if there is a catch, honestly. I do have a slide for negatives. And I'm going to get to that shortly. A slide. Listen to me. I'm like a boomer. Let's talk about slides. All right. Internally, Payload, we have some changes. This doesn't really impact anybody else. But for example, oh God. Thank you. SQLite and MySQL are on their way. That's more of a Drizzle thing than an us thing. They built us a couple features for Postgres that we needed to be able to do TypeScript migrations. The only thing we're waiting for SQLite and for MySQL are those features that we needed Drizzle to make exposed for SQLite and MySQL, and then we can just release. All the hard work on our side is done for those. So we're waiting. Those things are coming soon. We're working with the Drizzle team on that. We'll have more information shortly. That will happen long before any of this stuff that I'm talking about today happens. Yeah. So the OIDC plugin, Time Walker, that I'm going to try to make that easier for you, actually. We have some announcements for that coming up soon, and I think you guys are all going to really like them. I'm not going to spoil it today, but that's going to get easier. Yes, Paul, you are talking about the same thing I am. That's going to get easier, so heads up on that. But yeah, anything Express specific within Payload will need to change. I want to take a second and talk about the request and response that Node.js has and compare it to the web API request response. And this is something that I have had to come to terms with. When the app router came out with Next.js, they have the request and response that they use in the app router. And admittedly, I didn't really know what that was. I'll catch up to the questions in a second, but request response, there's an official web API for request and response, and that's shared between Node.js and the browser. And that's what you should be learning as a modern engineer. You should be learning the MDN docs for request response. Meanwhile, Node.js invented its own request response, and that's what Express uses. But that's 0% compatible with browser APIs, and it's kind of a relic that will be going away more and more into the future. So any time that you spend learning request and response from Node.js and Express is almost wasted time, and that's going to be an antiquated pattern. So the earlier that we can get to the web API request response, the better we're all going to be as developers. And that means we've got to rip off that Band-Aid with Payload eventually anyways. Even if we weren't going to move to Next.js, we still should sunset our reliance on the Node.js request response, moving to these more modern paradigms. One question really quickly, why not Remix instead of Next.js? Well, I'm going to tell you my own personal thought. I think there's way too much drama around the Remix community. And I'll just say that. I will wear my heart on my sleeve right now, and I think that they are aggressive, and I don't like the combative nature of that team. I'm not going to lie. But I also think, I'm on the business side of Payload, and I talk to my enterprise customers, and I talk to engineers every day. And 9 times out of 10, they're building Next.js. They're not building Remix. It might seem like on Twitter, you hear a lot about Remix, but in the real world, you don't. And real enterprise projects are using Next.js way more frequently than Remix. And, that's the way it goes. All right, I'm going to catch up quickly. Bundler dilemma is a pain. Fully agreed. Fully agreed. Great DX, make Payload grow. We want to make plugins as easy as possible. That underpins this whole thing. 100% agreed. Let's see. Possible to use Vue components. I wouldn't do that if I were you, because that means you're going to load up Vue and you're going to load up React. If you're a Vue developer and you want to stick with Vue, Directus is pretty good. They're already Vue. We need to commit to React. You could probably load up your own JavaScript bundle inside of Payload and use Vue instead of React, but you're going to have some heartache there, and you're going to load up 2 front-end frameworks, and I just don't think that's the move, personally. I do believe in React's future, and we've already hitched our wagon to this, so I think we're going to remain React only. Bund frameworks. Yes, I would love to see Bund frameworks supported, and honestly, I didn't put that in this presentation today, but if anybody's going to do that, I bet Next.js is going to do that. And if Next.js does it, then Payload will inherit that automatically. So imagine that. Everyone's asking Next.js for Bund support, like native Bund support. If they do it, we get it for free. And that's a huge win there. So there's a couple Bund comments, just to address those. Move to Next.js will be a full app router migration. 100% through and through. It will be fully app router. We will try to leverage server components as much as possible. All of our endpoints would be app router 100%. The next Payload repo is my nightmare. That has not been fun to maintain. I honestly, we tried and we've made it work, but we are not a Next.js compatible repo right now. So we have to do things to maintain compatibility. And our backend is not fully optimized for the separation of client and server. And so you have to deal with slower than normal cold starts. If we did this right, this would get way easier and it would work out of the box. So my goal is to actually remove the requirement of the next Payload bundle repo completely. It would just be done out of the box, first party supported. It's not easy. Honestly, I want to get rid of that. That's part of my goal here. Yeah, Next had some bad feedback for sure. I haven't tried 14 yet. But I do have faith. There's a lot of perception about Next.js being powered by Vercel, and there's this whole corporate machine behind Next.js now, and there's a big connectivity between React and Next.js. And to me, open source software is hard to build, and the bigger the financial backing for the open source software, the more that I think that's a benefit. Because let's take a second. Do we really think that these issues that Next.js 13 had will continue? No, they're going to be fixed. It's already being fixed. It's only going to get better from here. And I think they learned a lesson. They learned a lesson to, number one, more clearly communicate that these experimental features are experimental. But number two, stability is important to everyone. And those two things, I think, are huge. I don't want to get locked into Vercel either. We are definitely not going to leverage any Vercel specific features. You will always be able to deploy Payload as an Express app wherever you want freely. One second, let me see here. Custom endpoints, setup and payload config. That I have a slide on. We're going to talk about custom endpoints shortly. Yes, we will get to that shortly. But one thing on that, it will work seamlessly. I can tell you that for now. Don't want to get locked into Vercel. Why can't there be a complete separation of the admin and the API? Yes. Well, Zephyr, so Sanity did that because they charge you for bandwidth. You don't own the backend of Sanity ever. And that's their business model. But because we're open source, I want to give you the backend too. So they did that out of necessity. They can't give you the backend. They never will. But Payload does. So that's huge. But we will be modularizing our admin panel, like you mentioned, and like I think what you're asking for. That's going to be coming up very soon. That the admin panel will be a bunch of reusable React components that gets installed by a separate package that you can opt into if you want. And that's going to be huge alone. That'll be huge. That's what we're working on now, actually. Yeah, elephant icon is Postgres for sure. Okay, collection fields, surface them in a different way, localize fields to a translator. Virtual collections, okay, all right. You should open up a feature request for that. I'd be interested. The functionality, though, hosting them separately on a CDN, you can't host server components on a CDN, so you got to consider that. That is one downfall there, is that like right now our admin panel is a bunch of JavaScript files that runs fully in the browser. But that's the thing that's difficult in today's internet. You don't really, like the paradigm of the mental model of like, okay, here's my JavaScript for the browser and here's my JavaScript for the server. Like it's that gap is kind of going away, and I think it's going away for a very good reason. And maybe we can get to a point in the future where, yes, you can deploy your full bundle on like a CDN as just a bunch of static files, but Payload is isomorphic. It always has been. And there could be some significant benefits from embracing that rather than running away from it. All right, I'm going to run through these bullets real quick. Yeah, so we're going to get rid of our Express middleware if we do this. Admin components might need a little refactor to make sure that we can compose server and client components together, like embracing the paradigm. We won't have to do a build process anymore at all. That'll be awesome. We can get rid of our build process entirely. Payload build will not be a thing anymore. You won't need to do any of that. You'll just run next build and bam, your whole thing will be done. So that'll be huge. Getting rid of all that stuff, being able to focus on the product is a huge aspect of this. Okay, functionally. As you know, many of the functions inside of Payload right now, like validations, default values, descriptions, we have a couple functions that are shared between the back end and the front end. We got to figure out a pattern to continue to make those able to be shared, and it's not going to be server actions. I don't think we're going to over leverage server actions here. We need to make sure that those are all graceful still. The biggest thing is request and response, which I touched on a little bit already. But another thing in my mind is that I want to make sure that whatever we do, we work with Next Turbo out of the box, because that's developer experience right there. Turbo is huge. I'm very excited about that. Whatever we do, it needs to work with Turbo out of the box. All right, what does this mean for you? The first thing, and I got a lot of questions on Twitter about this when we released this poll, but one thing I want to make clear is that you will still be able to deploy Payload as an Express application. The changes involved there will be very minimal. You can do this in your sleep. Our Next.js custom server shows how you can export the Next route handlers to an Express compatible middleware. That's how it would work. It would be easy. Everything we open up inside your Next app, you could just turn around and then expose it in an Express server the same way. That's how Payload Cloud will continue to operate. This will be a first-party supported thing. So your Express changes right now will be pretty simple. But if you do have custom React components, you're probably going to need to go in and add use client if they do use context or hooks or anything like that. So you're going to have to migrate some of your React components, just adding in the use client. Let me catch up quickly here. Move to the app router. Tenancy functionality will work seamlessly. It'll work exactly the same as it does now. That won't change at all. Multi-tenant, our approach there, it will all work exactly the same. Yeah, Fastify would work, Railway would work, Fly.io would work. Any of these, anything on AWS, like however people deploy on AWS or Azure, any of these platforms, it would work exactly the same. So I think on that side, I'm pretty confident that we're not locking into Vercel at all here. I'm going to probably deploy in Vercel because it makes things easier. I'll tell you that. And I'm not even a shill, I swear. I'm not shilling for Vercel. I probably will. Anyway, so the config is probably going to change very little. The only thing I could see changing is like the TypeScript definitions for custom endpoints and custom middleware. Those things will change slightly because we're getting rid of the Node.js request response, going over to the web API request response. I don't have founder money, man. I'm broke. Funny story about being a founder. You don't pay yourself as much as you think you would. So that's definitely a common misconception. Maybe when we're Series D or Series E or whatever, like maybe then I might like finally see the fruits of my labor. But no, we're not making a lot of money right now. Let me tell you that. The goal as a founder, especially as a series stage company as a seed stage company, is to spend as little money as possible. So our free trials right now on Payload Cloud are like expensive. That's what we're paying our money for, giving people stuff for free. So you're welcome. Anyway, leveraging between the two worlds, Next.js and Express with an adapter. That's pretty much going to be possible out of the box. That's not going to be hard. You're going to get that for free. We don't need to do anything there. Like I mentioned before, you can already deploy the Next.js app on Express. So you kind of get that for free. Migrate the TS code base to JavaScript. Hell no. Absolutely not. That's a 0% from me, my guy. We are going to be TypeScript through and through. The one thing there, though, with Next.js, you can opt into TypeScript, so you would get that for free out of the box. For those of you that don't want to use TypeScript, which I don't know who you are, or if you're like truly in the year 2023 right now with us, but if you wanted to use JavaScript, you could with Next.js. All right, cool. I went backwards. So here's a couple pictures that I took of, okay, just to continue the ad for a minute. I'm very interested in these two things. These are shit photos that I took of the Next.js conf, but on the left you see unified function runtime. Notice that I have not said the word edge a single time yet, and that's deliberate. I think there's actually like, ooh, yeah, look at that, edge, Arcto machine. Good question. This is at the top of my mind, and I'm talking about it right now, so congrats. There's going to be backing up. I don't fully understand this yet, just to say that. But supposedly, there's been kind of backlash about the difference between Edge and serverless, which I could see. With Edge, you don't have full node access, and they're fast, but you don't have half of the things that you have with serverless. And also, you're limited to 2 megabytes per function. And if you could unify them, whatever that means, I have no idea. Maybe there's some new technology coming out that I don't know about. But if those two things are unified, that could be a huge DX win. And it could really benefit your end users as well. So that's huge. Yes, Mikey, cold starts. I agree. But on the right, you can see 0 cold starts. I don't know how they're going to do this. I have no idea. But it sounds great. And I want to be first in line to reap the benefits of that with Payload. I have no idea how they would do that, but it's very interesting to me. So that was my big takeaway of NextConf, these two things right here. And this has real world impacts to Payload. So sign me up, and I pray that they can do it. Good luck. Rip. All right. Cool. Yeah. Future. What's going to change with our API? The config will stay exactly the same. It will be changed 0%. So yeah, Mikey, you're on it. Me too. I think we think the same. Payload config won't change at all. If you're going to create a new project, you would just create Payload app and you get your whole thing out of the box. But if you wanted to add Payload to an existing Next.js app, we basically, just like the Next Payload monstrosity, we would just open up a bunch of endpoints in your existing Next app. So we might have like an install command or something, but that's it. Then you would just have all the endpoints opened up. You'd have payload as a dependency, and you're off to the races. So it would be fairly simple. Oh, AI. Oh, God, Paul, you're really trying to get me going. Well, you guys don't talk about AI at all. We do have some AI features, but the best roadmap is one that's defined by your community rather than like a couple people up top sitting in their ivory tower coming up with bullshit features. And none of you guys ever ask about AI at all. So to me, that's fairly low priority for us. We do have some AI features coming out, though, and I think you will like them. But yeah, this will happen in the next major version if we do it. It'll be a 3.0 thing. So, yeah. Yeah, Nate, let's get the keywords going in here. Good stuff. All right, so create payload app will be easy, obviously, but we'll have an install command. Honestly, I think the biggest difference would be the removal of the rec and the res like we have now and moving over to the web API request response. I think all of us should be learning that anyways. That is the future. We need to learn it. We need to embrace it. Like I said many times at this point, if you want to deploy an Express app, you still can. Knock yourself out. Plugins would get insanely easier. That's a big win here. Plugins would be so much simpler if you don't have to deal with aliases. You can build very substantial things, and then they would just work. Imagine that. I don't think we're going to use server actions that much. I think server actions are good because they allow you to avoid opening up endpoints, but we're always going to have endpoints anyways, right? Like, we need endpoints. We're always going to have endpoints opened up. If we do that, why would we do server actions as well? Maybe we will. I don't really know. But I'm not seeing that server actions will be the big driver here. I think that might be a nice to have in certain areas. But in reality, most of everything would still just go through the APIs like they do now. I like that because it uses the REST API. It uses the REST API out of the box. And that kind of connectivity is good. We can't fetch server-side on client component. I'm not following that, but I'm very interested in what that means. TRPC, we might look into that a little bit. I'm not sure yet. Possibly. So storybook documentation, that's our first priority right now. Jake and Jared are going to be leading that effort, and they are already making progress there. So keep an eye out for that. Server actions make more sense for a company-specific thing. Yeah, I mean, we might use them here and there, but that's not a huge driving reason for us to do this. Server components are. That is huge. But server actions, I don't really know. All right, let's keep going. Negatives. Here's the slide. I think, Paul, you asked for it. Number one, middleware. Middleware and endpoints. Those are going to change. I don't want to cause you guys any grief. Let's skip this slide. Yeah, my worst fear is making you guys deal with crazy migrations. I don't want to do that. I want you to be able to upgrade and make it easy and smile as you update. And so we do not take breaking changes lightly. I do not want to like reinvent anything wherever possible. So that's one negative. Like, this would come with 3.0 breaking changes. It wouldn't be significant. You might just need to update your type like inference or your type signatures of your custom middleware and endpoints. But yeah. So cold starts. Right now, that monstrosity package, Next Payload, has 4 or 5 second cold starts, and that is garbage. This is one thing that I could use some help from the community on. Like, we're going to be doing a proof of concept. Number one, first thing we do is figure out how to absolutely minimize cold starts with like drizzle and payload. And that's it. Imagine like a proof of concept that has the local API. If we got rid of all of our dependencies, like right now we have SWC, we have Webpack, we have Express, we have a lot of dependencies inside of Payload. But if I made the local API as small as humanly possible so that it is just the local API and drizzle, and that's it. That's the only thing that gets bundled into our serverless functions. If we do that, we get it as small as possible. Let's see how fast we can get these cold starts. That's goal number one. So I guess my ask for the community is, like, if you guys have used drizzle in a serverless function before, what are the cold starts like? Like, let's see how Drizzle is going to be the limiting factor there, because Payload, the local API, there's not that much code involved. So the smaller we can get that, the happier everybody will be. Let me see. Let's catching up here. Yeah, I think Paul's kind of nailing exactly what I would say there right now in chat about server and client components and the composability and the everything. That's going to be a challenge for us to solve, but you guys won't have to worry about it too much. So one thing on the negatives, and I heard this a lot on Twitter, is, well, what about Vue? What about Nuxt? What about Astro? How can I do that? I want to be very clear here. Let's take Astro, for example. You could still deploy Astro and Payload on the same server exactly how you do now. Those things would not change. Even if Remix, you want to deploy Remix and Payload on the same server, go for it. You can do that still. I just don't want to have the perception that if you're using Astro, Payload is not ideal. Like, that's not the goal. We're always going to be compatible with every front end, and I'm going to have to fight against that perception quite a bit. Mikey, really? What about serverless? Mikey, have you ever tried serverless before? Yeah, Remix, that whole Remix and Payload thing, that will still work. That whole package will still work out of the box with any of this. Okay, so let's keep going. MongoDB will also be important to test cold starts with. We're going to get to that, but definitely that is going to be something we need to look into as well. Mongoose, MongoDB, 100%. All right. So what's next? What are we going to do here? I mentioned early on that we wanted to run this as a skunkworks, like a quick exploration, proof of concept, see how far we can get, see what the cold starts look like. Even if Vercel doesn't fix the cold start issues, like, we need to be responsible for that. We're not going to make you guys deal with bad cold starts one way or another. So that's goal number one. Run a little experiment, see how far we can get. But we want your feedback. We want to hear your concerns. Oh yeah, Lambo, hell yeah. I would respond more positively if you said Ferrari. Lambos look like toys to me, but yeah. Marketing campaign. Yeah, exactly, George. That's exactly what I mean. Like, I don't want to, there are going to be benefits for people running Next.js, and we need to capitalize on that. Like, when I say capitalize, I really mean like in terms of making people happy. Like, if you are using Next.js, your life is going to get a hell of a lot easier. So it will be very good for Next.js, but I don't want to like connect our cart to that wagon too much, if that makes any sense at all. But the proof of concept is the next. Payload tendency plugin. Well, yeah, Jesse, I'd be interested in that. Like, what are you doing now, and what would be different? Maybe if you could like give us any information about that, that would be huge. Billy, localization, those are features that we're working on now that will be out for 2.0 that will also automatically be inherited with 3.0 whenever that happens. But localization, that is going to become easier on 2.0 in parallel to all this stuff that we're using. So yeah, I think the performance thing with Next.js, I'm really interested in the Next.js compiler. Like, that's huge to me. It's a very difficult problem to solve, but they've got a lot of funding and they've got a lot of research and development going into making sure that part is fast. And I think they're going to do it. I have confidence there, actually. I'll tell you what, I'm sure as hell not going to build a Rust compiler for Payload. So if we want Rust, if we want compilers built on Rust, we should probably go with Next.js. Like, that's the best bet there, I think, personally. Yeah, I think that might be all that I have, really. Anybody from Payload want to chime in, or any other questions here? Caching. I think that's going to be on an opt-in basis for caching. We want to make sure that we use the lowest common denominator of Next.js features, only the stuff that we need, and then allow you to opt in everywhere else. So that will make it so, all these unstable cache things with with Next.js, we're not even going to leverage those. If you want to, you can. But I think, honestly, we're going to just go with the lowest common denominator. Server components are the thing that I'm going to want to use. That's it. And the route handlers. But that's it. Those two things. Hats, I believe they were sent out. Might get those soon. We need to send out some more of those little suckers. Yeah, Sean, let's get some more hats going. That would be good. Okay, what's the best way to experiment with Payload and Next? Honestly, a custom server is going to be a better way. All of our boilerplates come with Next and Payload on the same Express server. That's going to be easy. You can do that now. That's probably not going to change that much, and you can leverage that out of the box right now. So I would try that. The hats are, yeah, I think they're being sent. You got to ask Sean about that. He's the hat keeper. Yeah, Jared, I agree. I don't want to worry about bundlers anymore. That is, that needs to go away. It's not a fun part of web development. Actually, web development's great besides bundling. That's it. Yep, and aliases. All right. I am done. I don't want to talk anymore. Good night.